And so, in the midst of that, it's very, very easy to spiral down into despair and pessimism. Things are amazingly prosperous in many parts of the world, more than ever before, for more people, more of the time than ever before in human history. However, that's not true for the environment. The environment has gotten clobbered. And climate change is the big picture, the big story, the big elephant in the room of all of that. And that only adds to the cloud of apprehension and fear, especially that young people are shrouded in when they look to their future. And so the overarching message that I'm trying to convey here is that accepting all of that, recognizing all of that, and not dismissing it, there are nevertheless data driven, evidence based reasons to be hugely optimistic about our future. And primarily, it's because new technologies offer the potential for prosperity to explode globally. And at the same time, allow us to solve some of our most pressing environmental problems.
Hey, y'all, it's Dr. Know It All. I have the privilege today of being with Adam Dorr. Actually, I should say Dr. Adam Dorr, since you do have a PhD. You are the director of the research program and lead the research team at Rethink X, which people might know about through Tony Seba, who does a lot of a lot of very big videos and things like that. And you, of course, do them as well. And you also have a book that's just behind you called Brighter, which is, yeah, it's got the S on the front. So you know it's the S-curve adoption. I have not had a chance to read the book yet, unfortunately, but I have watched all 6 of the videos you've produced on it so far. Let's see, what do you have? You have a master's from the University of Michigan, School of Environment and Sustainability, and we'll have to fight because I have a PhD from Ohio State. So yeah, you know, and also a PhD from UCLA's Luskin School of Public Affairs. So a very nice pedigree, and obviously you are doing amazing things. Your work is on sustainability, disruption, technology, environment, and on and on and on. And so I have a ton of questions. Hopefully we'll just have a chat about a bunch of things. First of all, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's great to be here.
Cool. So I think we'll just start with this is something that I think is just worth like setting the baseline for, because a lot of times people watch these videos and they just come into this cold. So we should probably start with the idea of what is disruption, sort of as an abstract or general term to start with. So yeah, take it away.
Yeah, sure. Well, a disruption is something that is it's sounds like a word that's familiar, and you would think that we would be so familiar with this concept throughout history and the transformations technologically that the human species has gone through over hundreds of thousands of years that this would be automatic for everybody. But it's not. It wasn't completely clear until just the last couple of decades. And so what we now understand is that technology doesn't improve slowly and incrementally and steadily and linearly over long periods of time. Instead, what we see is that technological advancement proceeds in leaps and bounds, and there's a consistent pattern to that disruption. Hence the S-shaped, the sigmoid curve on the cover of the book, and that characterizes many technologies disruptions. And so what we see is a new technology or set of technologies arises, and their costs and capabilities make them competitive. And those costs and capabilities aren't static, they improve over time. And as they improve, the new technology offers better and better and better value. And so what happens is the new technologies outcompete the older ones. They outcompete them. That's a crucial thing to understand. The new technologies are overwhelmingly competitive. And that is the reason why we see such rapid adoption of new technologies. Instead of a new technology being adopted over 50 or 100 years across multiple generations, we almost always see them adopted in just 10 to 15 years. And this applies to technologies of all kinds, as different as car tires are from digital cameras, as different as fabric dyes are from carpenter's nails. The same pattern again and again and again across history. And we've documented more than, well, we're well over 100 historical cases of disruption. And so that's how we can be very confident that the technology disruptions we're in the midst of today are likely to follow that exact same historical pattern, the S curve that we've seen so many times before.
So cool. That's really amazing to think about that stuff. And of course, the opposite is also true. You've got the positive sigmoid on your book cover, but there's the negative sigmoid, which is the older technology, which gets displaced. Also, I think you guys say X marks the disruption or something like that. That you've got these two crossing sigmoid curves and they cross, and it's like one deteriorates as the other one, because of course it is ultimately a zero-sum game. There's only so many. Well, actually, that's not even true, though. I take that back, because one of the things I was going to say is really interesting thing that you guys talk about a lot is this is not a one-to-one transition. It's not like
That's right.
every analog camera is being replaced by one digital camera. It opens up a whole new, it's like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. It's a phase change. And so think about how many more cameras there are now than there were in like 1990 when it was all analog cameras. It's just insane how many more cameras there are right now than there used to be. So it isn't just a zero-sum game. It broadens the market and broadens the market. So yeah, it's pretty impressive stuff. I think
Yeah,
go ahead.
that is one of the key features that's also part of the pattern disruption we see again and again. The new technologies don't just sort of drop in and substitute out one for one the old ones. They create a new system, and that new system tends to almost always be larger because lower costs and greater capabilities translate into new possibilities. New things are possible. Digital cameras can do things. They create possibilities that were just simply not available with
Right.
celluloid film, and that is a consistent part of the picture of disruption as a whole. We're likely to see that with energy. We're likely to see that with transportation. We're certain to see it with food and with artificial intelligence and the disruptions of energy, transportation, food, and labor. They will all be much bigger systems with vastly greater possibilities than the older technologies and the systems based on them that we have today.
Right. And I guess I was going to ask you about the 4 or 5 types of major changes, but the first, I think I was going to save this to the end, but I think it's worth talking about now. You and I think Rethink X in general are very optimistic. You have an optimism bias in general. So why do you feel relatively confident that that optimism bias is justified? Why shouldn't you be pessimistic? The world's changing. It's going to be terrible. Everything's going to be awful. We're going to live in some dystopian world. And, why think positively about this?
Well, I would never deny that there's some bias. We're all biased, and it's impossible to be perfectly neutral and perfectly objective. I think instead, what I would argue is that the evidence and the data from both history and the present moment give us reason to be optimistic. And again, it comes back to the new technologies that are coming online in these 4 sectors: energy, transportation, food, and labor. All of them have properties that we should get excited about. And it didn't have to be that way. In energy, it's clean technologies. This is not just, well, I should say, we have had dirty disruptions in the past. So fossil fuels disrupted biofuels in the 19th century. So it's partly a matter of good luck that we've got clean technology driving the disruptions today. It could be that a dirtier transportation technology, some sort of engine that was much more polluting, could be disruptive. We could imagine such a technology if it were cheap enough. People would switch to it, companies would switch to it, industries would switch to it. We're lucky that electric vehicles are cleaner and more efficient and better and cheaper and so forth. So part of it is good luck. But the other part of it is that these technologies and the 4 disruptions they're driving today, they are going to slash costs across the entire economy because energy goes into everything. It's part of every supply chain,
Right.
part of every product and service. It's a foundational sector. The same is true for transportation. To a lesser degree, food, and certainly labor, also true. So as those things become disrupted by technologies that are driven primarily by their cost competitiveness, that implies costs across the entire economy will fall. We will be able to do more with less. We will be able to do more productivity and more constructive work. We will be able to achieve more of what we want, and we will also be able to clean up messes we made in the past and avoid making them going forward. All of this together is what, to me, provides us with reasons to be optimistic about what these technologies hold, and as opposed to purely pessimistic about the risks that are associated with it. And there are risks,
Right.
and we can talk about those. I don't want to dismiss those, but I think the upside is likely to be overwhelming relative to the downside risks, especially if we can see those risks coming and be a bit prepared for them. And
Okay.
this time it's a bit different. 30, 40, 50 years ago, and further back than that, technology disruptions blindsided us. We didn't understand them. We didn't know how to prepare for them. And any massive change that you're not prepared for is going to feel much more like a catastrophe and much less like an opportunity. Today, if we can be prepared for this, if we can see this stuff coming, we can get ready, we can mitigate the risks and the downsides, and we
Right.
can focus on maximizing those upsides. That's what makes me optimistic.
Okay. And really, I mean, that seems to be the mission of the company, is to sort of say, like, let's be prepared for these things. Don't go into it blind like people did before. I think even dirty transitions, though, I thought it was really interesting. I can't remember which of the videos it was, one through six, but noting the fact that a car was a clean transition, a clean disruption to horses, because at least in cities, it was just, there was piles of horse poop on the roads, which carries disease. It stinks. It's disgusting. And dead horses. There was that picture that you showed of, like, just a dead horse on the side of the road. I don't know if that was New York or where, but it's just like, wow, so we think of cars as kind of dirty and polluting nowadays, but compared to a horse, at least in a congested area like a city, a car was a way better solution than a horse was. Yeah. So,
Well, part of that is there's a lesson there, and I don't think I mentioned it in the video. I will in a future one now that you pointed out, and that is you have to measure the right thing in order to get a
right.
clear sense of what the disruption really entails. And in this case, horses and automobiles, the thing you want to be measuring, the metric to keep an eye on, is passenger miles traveled or vehicle miles traveled or freight miles traveled. It's the miles traveled, it's the transportation that matters.
Right.
And so if you think about the two technologies, horse-drawn transport and automobiles and other forms of combustion engine vehicles for the last century or so, if we had moved as many miles of passengers, if we had moved as many vehicle miles or freight miles with horses as we have done with vehicles, with combustion engine vehicles, the entire planet would be knee deep in horse manure. I mean, it wouldn't have been physically possible because we've done so much more transportation when you look at the metric that matters. And that is easy to miss when you have a shift, a transformation of a system like our transportation system. That's easy to forget.
Right. Yeah. And again, that just goes to show that it's that expansion of the economy, of the world, of the possibilities. Since I'm very much a computer kind of guy, I think a lot about information disruptions and things, and the computers in the middle part of the 20th century till now totally not just disrupted the old way of doing things. In fact, my business partner and I were having a board of directors meeting last night, and we ended up getting off track a little bit, talking about how people used to use ledgers and stuff to keep track of stock shares, and just the nightmare aspect of trying to keep track of this stuff. And now we have spreadsheets that just, like, it's just automatic and it's very easy. So, as opposed to having probably a team of several people for our tiny little company to keep track of this stuff for us, it's just some software. So the expansion of possibilities is so big compared to what it was 100 years ago. People do tend to get used to it. I was born well before the internet came about, and I can't even remember what it was like to go to a library and pull out the little card catalog and sift through the little cards and pull out the one and goes like that. It's just crazy. Now it's just like click, 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 and I get an answer. In fact, now it's ChatGPT, so I just ask it and it tells me what I need to know. So I want to give you a chance to explicitly, you mentioned this before, but explicitly mention the four disruptions that are going on, which is energy, transportation, food, and labor. I would throw information into that group of things, but I have a feeling you don't think that's quite as fundamental, or maybe it's just sort of like lumped in with other things like labor for you.
Well, with information, I think our team's view on information and communications, we couple those two together.
Right.
Those have been disrupted over the last 30 years by computing, digital technologies, and the internet. So it was a convergence of the computing technologies and the entire ecosystem of hardware and software that enabled the complete transformation of a fundamental sector of the global
So what
economy
you're
and
saying
of
is
human
that
existence,
one
information
has
accounts.
already been disrupted.
That's already
Gotcha.
happened.
I got you. Okay,
And
gotcha.
it may be that that's not complete. It may be
Right.
that another transformation is in the offing for information and communications. But we've certainly, all of us who are, in our 30s and older, have just lived over the last 30 years since the early 1990s through a completely transformational period in human history.
Right.
The post-internet era for information and communications is totally different and with massively greater possibilities than the world before the internet.
Yeah.
And so if you want to have a bit of a sense of what are these disruptions going to feel like, well, try to remember what life was like before the internet and now afterwards. And the remarkable thing, again, is that it didn't take 100 years for that transformation to occur. The
Right.
first web browser, Mosaic, 1993 or so.
Right.
I remember as an undergraduate, the internet being brand new, email being brand new, websites were a novel
Right.
thing in my sophomore junior year. When I was a freshman, they just didn't exist.
Yeah.
And it was only 15 years later, by 2007, 2008, that we have the iPhone, we have
Right.
YouTube, we have streaming video, et cetera, et cetera. We have the modern, recognizably modern internet. And since then, things have progressed, but the radical transformation occurred in just about 15 years.
Right.
So that's what we're in for again, but not just in one sector. We're in it for 4 more simultaneously.
Right. And that's pretty mind blowing. So I don't know if you want to break it down. Yeah, maybe break down each one. I know for you in particular that environmental concerns are a very big deal. But I mean, break down energy, transportation, food, and labor, and then we can maybe talk about how they kind of actually stack, so that we're getting
Sure.
perhaps a hyper exponential transition rather than just an exponential one. So, but yeah, I mean, just start with energy and let's just go for it and talk about how that's being disrupted right now.
Sure. Well, energy is probably, of the 4, the furthest along.
Okay.
So the key technologies really that are driving the disruption of energy today are solar power, and specifically solar photovoltaic uh, uh, power generation,
Right.
wind turbines, electrochemical batteries, not any one specific chemistry or technology, although lithium ion, the family of lithium ion chemistries, is the driving force of electrochemical battery energy storage progress. But it's
Right.
batteries. So we often abbreviate that to SWB, solar wind batteries. And then there is a fourth, which is less central, but still important, and that is heat pumps, because heat pumps
Okay.
drastically increase the efficiency of heating and cooling, and that is important for a substantial fraction of the world's population in the higher latitudes. The majority of people in the world live where you don't need heating, but enough people do that is
Right.
still an important technology. But every person on Earth is going to be affected by solar, wind, and batteries, SWB. So that's the driving force, the trifecta really behind the energy disruption. And we've seen with all 3 of those technologies, costs plummeting and doing so consistently, and adoption growing on the exponential trajectory that is the first half or so of the S-curve. We see that clear as day, textbook case studies, basically, in all 3 of those, solar, wind, and batteries in energy. And Tony Seba, the founder of Rethink, co-founder of RethinkX, Tony was writing about this in 2009 and laid this entire disruption trajectory out 15 years ago. And so he was way ahead of most of the conventional thinking. If you wind back the clock to 2009, when he wrote his first book, Solar Trillions,
Right.
it seemed completely crazy to imagine that
Right.
clean energy would ever unseat fossil fuels, the dominance of fossil fuels in the energy sector. It just seemed unthinkable. And here we are. We're basically exactly where Tony said we were going to be. And that's what an understanding of disruption gets you. It gets
Right.
you a much greater ability to foresee realistically where we're headed and what the possibilities are.
Yeah. And I
That's
think
energy.
it's also worth thinking about, again, the phase change aspect of this type of power generation, because in storage, it's it's a moving away from the necessity for a centralized power solution like a coal burning power plant or a nuclear power plant. If you have solar and wind, you can place it where it needs to be to a large extent. If you happen to live in a totally gloomy place that has zero wind, then yeah, you're going to need some transportation of that energy from somewhere else. But generally speaking, I can put solar panels on my roof. I could have a farm and I could put some windmills up and generate a lot of the power that I need myself. And that is I think that's going to have big geopolitical consequences too, because one of the consequences of oil is that the oil economy, there are relatively few places that have a lot of it. And those places tend to have an outsized effect on the rest of the world. And the sun and the wind are pretty much everywhere. So you kind of get that one and you can localize it a lot more. So I don't know if you want to like think about that some more out loud, or we can move on to the next
Well,
one.
sure. I
Yeah.
mean, that is one of the extraordinary, and again, I would say lucky from a human perspective
Right.
and a geopolitical perspective, a lucky aspect of these three technologies, especially solar and batteries.
Right.
Wind turbines, it's harder to put a wind turbine on your roof or in a parking lot. You can do it, but it's a little more challenging. But solar panels and batteries are viable at every scale, from wearing them on your wrist.
Right.
I was one of those nerdy kids with a solar powered Casio watch when I was a kid. So you can have
I'm
solar
I'm
panels and
actually
batteries on
about
your
to
wrist.
go. I'm about to go on a trip to Belize, and I have my wife is actually, this one's an Apple Watch, but she has a solar powered dive watch. So it's like,
There you go.
there it is. I was just
Well,
charging it up this morning. Yeah.
everything from that scale, right on your wrist, all the way up to the gigawatt scale for power generation, solar farms, and gigawatt hour scale for massive battery farms. Everything in between is viable. So solar and batteries have this extraordinary uh, viability across all scales, and that makes them, as you were pointing out, um, decentralizable. They can be localized. They can go in anywhere at any scale. There's no sort of minimum entry point. There's no barrier to entry because of the scale, which there is if you're forced to build $100 million or $1 billion coal or nuclear power plant. It's tough. That limits who has access to that, where those technologies can be deployed. But solar and batteries can go literally anywhere, and
Right.
that has the potential. It has the potential to be a massive democratizing force as well, because one of the things that's so inequitable about the current energy system is that the technologies are not accessible to everyone, precisely because their scale and their technical requirements for construction and maintenance and upkeep and infrastructure integration and so on, those are those are exclusive. Those are exclusionary.
Right.
Not everyone everywhere. Not all individuals, not all communities, not all nations have equal access. And with solar and batteries, especially, and wind, it's different. And that is one of the things that's, again, a reason to be optimistic.
Right. Right. And I really appreciate when you were talking about this. I keep getting off track here, but like the idea that you need prosperity to attack the problems we've created. That saying like, oh, this stuff is all just for us and nobody else gets it, and you guys are poor and you don't have access to this technology, is a bad outcome for the world, because if you don't have some level of prosperity, you don't have the will or the means to attack these problems and solve them.
No, that's exactly right. Prosperity is central to any problem solving, and that's just as true in our own personal lives as it
Yeah.
is for communities, for entire societies. Right? We know, everybody knows in their own personal life, if you have a problem, it's massively easier to tackle that problem amidst prosperity than if you're hanging on by your fingernails
Right.
for 20 other reasons, because you lack the resources that you need, you lack the time that you need, you lack the means or the energy, whatever else it is. Prosperity is perhaps the ultimate enabling condition for solving problems. And so one of the things that I think is most profoundly misguided it's not the entire environmental narrative or environmental movement, and certainly not all environmental disciplines, but there's a very prominent thread in environmental discourse that
Right.
that argues for austerity, for downsizing, for contraction, for degrowth, and other terms for the same general idea. And I believe that's very misguided because history and everyone's personal experience shows that that will only make it harder to solve our problems, not easier.
Right. Okay. That's yeah. That's actually is I was going to talk about transportation next, but let's talk about food in relation to that
Sure,
because
yeah.
it is I think a lot of people think about energy, transportation, and labor, but not too many people besides Rethink X think about food. Just personal anecdote, I've been a vegetarian since 1990, but I'm getting old. My doctor's like, you need to start eating meat products that have fewer carbohydrates because your body's not metabolizing carbohydrates. And I'm like, oh, but I really don't want to because, but but that seems like that a lot of people would say, though, that's punitive. You're telling me to be austere, not eat meat, things like that. So how is this food revolution or disruption, like what is it and how is that going to actually make life potentially better for all of us?
Well, it's pretty extraordinary. Rethink X published quite a landmark report on this in 2019.
Right.
Tony Seba and Catherine Tubbs were the lead authors and researchers on that. And this really did awaken the world to especially the technology or set of technologies that fall under the general term precision fermentation. This is really the key technology. There are several others. Cellular agriculture is another one, literally the growing of animal cells into tissue, into muscle tissue, and you can imagine producing cuts of meat, steak, and fillets of fish, and so forth that way. But what I'm talking about and what we are really focused on is precision fermentation, which is combining uh, cutting edge precision biology tech with ancient, age old fermentation
Right.
technology that we use to make beer and bread and cheese. And precision fermentation is really the one that has so much disruptive potential because with precision fermentation, you can produce any molecule, protein, fats, uh, and ingredients, basically.
Right.
You can produce anything that you can imagine, pretty much, with this technology. Its possibilities are incredibly broad, and you can do it with the same uh, throughput that we see in other fermentation production processes. Namely,
Right.
you provide a simple feedstock like sugar to an organism like a yeast, and you get the products out that you're targeting. And that is vastly more efficient. It's vastly more controllable. It's vastly cleaner because you're not introducing things like antibiotics, pesticides, and so forth into the
Right.
supply chain anywhere. It's controlled conditions.
And
You know
it can be
exactly
done
what you're
in
getting
less
every
land
time.
mass as well, right? I mean, as
And
opposed
then
to
and then of
grazing.
course that
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
so much more efficient that you need far fewer resources of all kinds. Uh, a tiny fraction,
Right.
1/10 or less, up to 1/100th of the water, the land, the raw material inputs, uh, the energy inputs, and so forth. So
Gotcha.
you have a massively more efficient fundamental technology for food production.
And
Now,
if people think
food
this is
people
not
are
if people think this isn't scalable, of course, all you have to do is look around at how much beer is out there.
yeah
Walk into any store, any
yeah.
gas station, any liquor, it's like there's just beer everywhere. So
We
clearly,
make a lot of beer, we make
yeah,
a lot of wine, we make a lot of cheese. We
right,
can scale this technology for
right,
sure.
right,
I mean, like any new technology, we're seeing this in EVs, we're seeing it in energy. There are limiting factors, but
right.
those are never constraining in the long term.
Yeah.
We
So what
supply.
yeah, why isn't this, I mean, why hasn't this been around for 50 years already? We have
Well,
the basic. Yeah, go ahead.
it's the precision biology part that is so
Okay.
difficult and so expensive. This is so in the early years, the earliest applications of this technology, where we were using genetic technology to reprogram yeast and other microbial organisms to produce different byproducts as part of their life cycle. Initially, that was so difficult to do
Right.
and had so much complexity in it that it was only viable to make pharmaceutical products like insulin, because you were literally talking about millions of dollars per kilogram of final pure product. But as we've come down the cost curve over the last 20 or 30 years, even a little longer in some cases, the early applications of this, as we've come down the cost curve, you enter into new product categories that become commercially viable. So when you get down into the hundreds of dollars per kilogram range, then it's viable for cosmetics, for supplements, for certain material uses. And now we're just now getting to the point where the technology is cheap enough that it's competitive with food products, bulk protein products, like what you pay per kilogram, for example, for beef, chicken, eggs,
Right.
dairy, and so forth. Now, what we do also know, however, because just of analyzing the inputs and the potential scaling, we can see that the floor of the prices is way lower. These technologies can make protein and other food products, they can make their costs half, a fifth, a tenth of what
Wow.
it costs to purchase animal products today. Because we know that, and fundamentally it's because of the massively greater efficiencies. Because we know that, we can see where the disruption is headed. If you can walk into the grocery store and buy a product that is as good or better in every way compared to the animal product sitting right next to it, and it is a fraction of the cost, most people, not everyone, but most
Right.
people are going to make an economically driven choice there.
Right.
And that is an example of why economics drive disruption. That's what we're going to see.
Okay. And I think that's a really, really important point, I think, to like harp on a little bit here is this, so much of this is market driven. If you create if you create a product that is economically more efficient and is going to cost less for the consumer and is going to be the same. So so I think what you're saying here, of course, with precision fermentation is you're not going to get a cut of steak. That's a whole different technology. That's actually growing it in a lab and stuff. And that is not nearly as far as along. But precision fermentation for something like chicken nuggets or hamburgers or anything with like chopped up meat or something like that in it, it's going to be pretty much indistinguishable, right? Even molecularly.
Yeah, well, it will be chemically identical essentially, and
Right.
we will be able to produce food products that are as good or better than the ones that we obtain from animals, and have in some ways superior attributes. As I mentioned, you don't need to use antibiotics, you don't need to use
Right.
pesticides when you're producing things in laboratory conditions, or brewery conditions, which have to be sterile. I mean, brewing is a
Right.
very meticulous industry, precisely because you can't allow contamination to occur. So there are going to be major advantages there. And another thing to understand is that it's not just end customers. It's not just products for end customers that are facing disruption. It's all along the supply chain, including between businesses. So precision fermentation is very much a business to business disruption as well. And that happens less visibly behind the scenes, further up the supply chain. And that has already started. For example, most of the world's cheese is now processed. It's curdled, not with rennet. Rennet was the extract from calves' stomachs. You had to extract an enzyme from the stomach of a living calf while it was still nursing in order to curdle and properly produce cheese.
Wow.
That was how we had always produced cheese for forever, until only about 15 years ago. And then the changeover occurred. And today, the overwhelming majority of all cheese is produced using the chemicin protein, the enzyme, and that is made with precision fermentation. No more extracting it from calves. This is not a widely understood example, but it's just the tip of the iceberg for what precision fermentation is going to do in the business to business side of things, up the supply chain, out of view of the consumer. And then at the same time, there will be the consumer facing disruption as well.
Right. Is it my understanding that like Impossible Burgers and things like that use some of that technology or not? Okay.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
That's part of their secret sauce, as it were. The reason why the Impossible Burger is such a much more convincing plant-based ground beef product compared to previous offerings of veggie burgers is precisely because it has ingredients that are produced with precision fermentation. Heme is the molecule. I believe, if my understanding is correct, that is something that is found in soy plants. So it's a plant-based molecule, but it's produced in bulk and quantity using precision fermentation, and then that is what gives the meatiness and the juiciness um, to the Impossible Burger that makes it such a convincing
Right.
burger.
So the fact of the matter is, if whether or not you've had that, if you've had cheese anytime in the last decade, you're already, without even knowing it, eating the results of precision fermentation. That's
That's right.
really, really interesting to think about. So, because I know food tends to be a very polarizing kind of thing.
Yes.
People are like, no, 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 you can take this cow out of my cold dead hands, that kind of thing. But it sounds like it's just going to happen potentially behind the scenes so much that by the time people realize that it's going to be a done deal, and it's like, well, yeah, you've been eating that for years and you didn't even realize it.
And another thing, people are picky. They're sensitive. They're particularly sensitive about food compared to other technologies. That's a fact, and it's to be expected going into this disruption.
Right.
But another pattern that we do see across all disruptions is that people, consumers, all of us, we don't have a an ability to accurately predict our future preferences very well.
Right.
So when people are surveyed about would you use this new technology if it were available? Will you adopt this in the future? Would you ever X, Y, and Z? People are overwhelmingly skeptical and pessimistic when you interview them, when you survey them ahead of time. And if you're my age or older, you'll remember this with the internet. I can remember people saying, you think people are going to buy things through their computer? You think anybody's ever going to put their credit card into a computer and purchase something on the internet? You're crazy. I would never do that. And of course, it doesn't take 50 or 100 years for people to kind of turn
Right.
around and the culture to shift and expectations and standards and preferences to adapt. That happens very quickly. And before you know it, it's just normal. And the same will be true, perhaps with a little more lag because of the pickiness we have naturally about food.
Right.
But it'll be the same with food. And it's not like our food today is, I mean, objectively, we should be a little squeamish about it. If you know exactly where your meat was coming from and what processes went into it, if you look at the junk food in the supermarket, these things are not exactly natural, and they're not exactly they're not exactly. I'm trying to think of. I'm optimistic, and I'm trying to think of a positive way to frame this. But let's just say that if you could really see how the sausage was made for every product, a lot of that is stomach turning and very discouraging.
Right.
So we turn a blind eye to that already
Right.
with today's products without thinking twice. And so our expectation looking forward with precision fermentation, cellular agriculture, and the new food technologies is it will be the same pattern again. People will try the new products. They will enjoy them. They'll save money. They will adopt them. And the resistance will be far less than people imagine today.
Right. Right. Okay. That makes good sense. Let's turn to one that I think maybe is a little further along, but maybe in between energy and food is
Well,
transportation.
actually,
yeah. If you want to touch
can
it,
I say one more thing about food
absolutely.
because it's so important?
Of course.
It's so important. And that is the amount of land that we currently use for animal agriculture is staggering. This is very, very poorly understood by the general public. But we use, estimates vary, but it is on the order of 1/4 of all habitable land on the planet for directly and indirectly supporting animal agriculture, for producing animal products. 1/4 of all of the land in the world. And if we were to free that land up by switching to food products based on precision fermentation and cellular agriculture instead, we would get about 80% of that land back. Some of it we would need to repurpose for growing the feedstock, the sugar that we have to feed to the yeast in the fermentation process. But we would get about 80% of that back. My team's calculations show that 80%, the amount of land we get back, that is an area the size of the United States, China, and Australia combined.
Jeez.
That's the amount of land we're talking about getting back from animal agriculture from this disruption. It will literally be the greatest opportunity for environmental conservation, preservation, rewilding that we have ever seen, and far beyond what, frankly, most environmental discourse has ever imagined would be
Right.
possible. So this is an incredibly exciting opportunity for humanity as a whole. I cannot
Right.
overstate how much that means to free up all of that land. This is worth getting excited about. This is
Yeah.
worth being optimistic about.
And not just on land too, but of course coastal waters as well, overfishing of coastal
Oh yeah,
waters, things
it's
like that. Yeah. So yeah.
my. Well, wait for it. To put a pin in it, my team will be publishing
Oh,
some new work about the food disruption in the oceans
okay.
later this year, and so stay tuned for that. You're absolutely right, though. The food disruption will affect seafood just as much, animal products from the oceans, just as much as animal products from land.
Okay. And this is wonderful. One of the biggest problems with environmental catastrophe is habitat loss for everything besides humans or everything besides our domesticated animals. And so we can reclaim some of that land, but a lot of it can, like you said, I think you call it rewilding, just go back to what it needs to be, and it can become a natural ecosystem again. So that would be amazing. Like really,
Absolutely, and
yeah.
again, I mean, the proportions are what are so important here. I mean, compared to all other land use, animal agriculture is just overwhelmingly dominant. It's the amount of land we use to support animals is 30 to 40 times greater, depending on exactly how you measure it. Just call it 35 times greater than all other built environment land use put together. So all of the
Wow.
land we use for cities, all the land we use for infrastructure, for airports, for rail, for whatever other land use you might imagine, all the golf courses in the world, all of that other land use is a rounding error compared to the amount of land we dedicate to raising animals and supporting animals and feeding animals. And so, where should our attention be focused if we want to really solve the problems related to land, like you mentioned, habitat loss, habitat fragmentation, and so forth? Well, uh, this is you mentioned that have been a vegetarian for a long time. Precision fermentation and cellular agriculture, they are a way to go vegetarian or even vegan without really going vegetarian or vegan. They're a
Right.
way to transcend that dichotomy and have the best of both.
Right. Okay. Wow, that makes me at least very, very happy. I like so okay, but let's definitely talk about transportation next. I want to, the fact that my channel is very focused on Tesla technology, things like that. So of course, I think that the viewers of this channel are going to be particularly like, yeah. Let's talk about disruption in transportation. So I definitely want to give a little bit of time to that one. So go for it. What is happening right now?
Well, so what we're seeing in transportation is exactly what Tony Seba laid out going back 15 years, which is the combination of electric vehicles and electrification. Primarily, the enabling condition there is improving battery technology,
Mhm.
but electric vehicles, autonomous or self-driving technology is another crucial piece of that puzzle. And then the third is the information technology for ride hailing, for
Right.
ride hailing networks that offer transportation as a service. If you put those three things together, electric, autonomous, and transportation as a service as an alternative to just privately owned transportation or public mass transit, you see the pieces of transportation disruption coming. And Tesla, you mentioned Tesla. This is, of course, the flag bearer for that entire disruption. And
Right.
Tesla has seen and understood this, perhaps as a direct result of Elon Musk's leadership, for example. But they are an example of a company that really understood Tony Seba's thesis from very early on. They see the connection between those three technologies and clean energy as well. I mean, solar power and so forth.
Right.
So Tesla is a stunning example of what success you can achieve if you see the disruption coming in advance and you leverage that knowledge ahead of time to take advantage of the opportunities that are there with all of these technologies falling in cost and being adopted exponentially.
Right.
And so we're in the midst of that right now. And again, you go back 10 years, 15 years, people thought Tesla was crazy. They thought Elon Musk was crazy. They thought Tony Seba was crazy. And here we are on the money with the growth of the industry and so forth. Now, and there's plenty of naysaying along the way. Things if things take a year or two longer than we might have hoped 15 years ago, that's not a material difference. If self-driving technology matures 2 or 3 years later than we'd originally hoped, that's not a material difference. What is relevant is that this disruption has already begun. EVs are growing explosively worldwide. Autonomous driving technology is maturing very rapidly. It is a real technology that you can take advantage of. You can go and ride in a robotaxi with no human driver intervention today in some parts of the world.
Right.
And 15 years from now, when the disruption is complete, we're going to be in a world where virtually all road transport is electric, autonomous, and very little of it, much less than today, will be owned privately. Instead, it will be fleets providing transportation as a service.
Yeah, that's one of the things that really gets me all the time is I'm just sitting here thinking, like, in my garage right now are 2 cars just sitting there. Like that is a waste of resources for the world. They could be out doing something else and providing valuable service. Not saying like my personal ones, but if those 2 cars could be operating at, say, 70-75% capacity as opposed to about 5 to 10% capacity that they are for us.
Right.
There's just that every car costs a lot of resources, not just money, but resources to build. And so if every one of those is being utilized more efficiently, that's really good for the environment. So, and yeah, as you say, the autonomous aspect of it is super critical to how all this works too, because it's not enough just to make a bunch of electric cars. It's not a one-to-one transition here. It's again, that phase change.
I think that this is even still today poorly recognized how profound the transformation is going to be when vehicles can operate themselves, when cars can drive themselves, when trucks can drive themselves, when delivery vehicles of all different sizes can pilot themselves, from drones to big delivery trucks. This is going to be an absolutely transformative technology. And I wrote a long time ago about the connection between the disruption of transportation and AI and the disruption of labor. Probably 2015 or 2016. I pointed out in an old blog post that autonomous vehicles are the tip of the automation iceberg. They are the pebble that will trigger the automation avalanche. Because if you solve the specific problem of, and it's a tough one,
right?
If you can figure out, and it's a software challenge, if you can figure out how to make a robot on wheels, a car, smart enough to navigate safely in Los Angeles traffic or downtown Manhattan or wherever else it is in the world, if you can do that and solve that specific case, that solution fairly straightforwardly generalizes to automation of many different kinds across industries and applications of all kinds.
Right.
And so it didn't surprise me at all. I anticipated then that the company that solved that problem with a general solution, the company that cracked that problem, would be in a position for its software to be the driving force behind automating labor across the entire global economy. So it didn't surprise me at all, for example, when Tesla announced its Optimus robot.
Right.
I remember at the time, some people didn't understand that is this a joke? Is this some prank of, Tesla's and Elon Musk, of course, have done interesting things in the past, but they've got a fun sense of humor. Maybe this is an April Fool's joke. No. This was very clear from a long time ago that it's the obvious next step for that artificial intelligence and automation technology. Right. Move from vehicles, which is a specific solution, to a general solution in robotics of all kinds. This is, I think, frankly, a no-brainer. And the amount of value that's there to be captured is staggering. And the transformation for human civilization there is staggering. So that bridges us from the transportation disruption to the labor disruption with AI and automation.
And I think Elon said that, I'll miss the quote exactly, but something like the economy is the labor force. And with robotic labor like this, what are the limits? Like, there's eventually an energy limit to how much energy you can supply on the planet, but he was basically saying, look, with this kind of labor, the disruption could be so large that everything else we've even been talking about so far is kind of a rounding error compared to it. So yeah, let's go for the labor thing. So how is labor going to get disrupted?
Well, intelligence has always been the limiting factor. I
Mhm.
mean, for more than a century, we did the first step of moving labor from human beings onto machines, from shifting the tasks that are done from human beings to and animals with
Right.
human and animal muscle power and then human brain power. But with the muscle power, we shifted that to the machines with mechanization,
Right.
unthinking mechanization over the last century or more. So a bulldozer can do 1,000 times more work than a person with a shovel
Right.
in an hour, a day, or a week, or a month. Massively more. But a bulldozer still needs an operator because if it's not self-driving, self-operating, if it's not intelligent at all, it only mechanizes work. It doesn't automate work. So there's a key distinction there. And what we have now with AI, artificial intelligence, of the narrow kind, we don't need general artificial intelligence necessarily, but
Right.
with narrow AI, we have the potential to automate vast swaths of the repetitive, dangerous work that only humans have been able to do up
Right.
until now. And I mean, this goes back a very long way. Adam Smith said that the real value of all things is the toil that goes into them.
Right.
And this is a way of saying that everything ultimately reduces to labor and is therefore limited by labor. Labor is the ultimate limiting factor. And so
Right.
this, I think, is probably what Elon Musk is talking about and others have talked about when they say, if you expand that limit, if you're no longer limited by how many people you have and how much they can work, then that is an explosive ripple effect across the entire economy because all of that constraint gets alleviated. Do you need more energy? Well, build robots to build more solar panels
Right.
and more wind turbines and more batteries. Do you need more raw materials? Build more robots to obtain the raw materials to work
Right.
to operate in the mines and so forth. Do you need more of anything? Build more robots to obtain those things. Do you need more robots? Well, build more robots to build more robots. So it's recursive as well.
Yeah.
And from an environmental perspective, I don't want it's easy to then leap to, oh no, we're going to have the entire world covered uh, with the footprint of all of these robots. No, if you need to remediate or restore a degraded environment, robotic labor is the way to do that. If you need to prevent pollution in the first place, so instead of cleaning up a mess, prevent messes from occurring in the first place, deploy robots to do that. The reason why we have messes today is because it's only because of cost.
Right.
Think of it. Every single scrap of litter, every shred of waste, every drop of goop that has ever been discarded or otherwise polluted the environment, it could have been cleaned up if
Right.
somebody had taken the time and effort to do it.
Right.
It's only a matter of cost and finite, limited labor.
Right.
But if you had an unlimited or open-ended, potentially not infinite, but an unconstrained reservoir of ultra cheap labor, you could achieve all of that. And so this is again one reason for getting so excited
Right.
about the future is that the cost of everything will plummet. The feasibility of achieving what today seems like the impossible, that just springs into view. It telescopes all of those possibilities forward when you bring automation of labor into the picture. And so this is, I struggle to emphasize strongly enough. You cannot overstate how profound this transformation is going to be.
Right.
The disruption of labor will be every bit as profound for the human condition as the advent of language or fire or the wheel or
Wow.
electricity. It's as big as all of those, every bit as big as all of those. It is going to change everything. And there will be turmoil in the transition. Absolutely. I mean, we have to figure out what to do when humans no longer need to work, no longer need to toil.
Right.
But
Right.
this is the dream of humanity since time immemorial. The dream of not having to toil from dawn till dusk in
Right.
order to earn your keep, to earn a crust. This has been a long-standing dream, and we're near realizing that, very near now.
Right. One just like I happen to be a history buff, and I love studying like World War I and the circumstances that led up to it. But one of the really fascinating aspects of that war is that people volunteered for the war, even knowing it was a meat grinder, because their lives were so desolate and utterly, just soul crushing, because they were doing the same laborious, incredibly boring task day after day after day for their whole lives. And they were never going to go anywhere else except for the farm or the factory that they worked in. And it was utterly soul crushing. And it's the kind of work that now has mostly been automated away. And we're human beings are not going like, boy, I really wish I could go back and work in a factory every day, 12 hours a day, and never have a break for the rest of my life until I got too old and then I just died. People don't go like, boy, I really pine for those old days like that. So hopefully, I was going to talk about, this disruption, like you said, with energy. You've got people who currently work for automotive companies that make internal combustion cars, oil mining, coal mining, refining, transportation. You've got drivers who do things. You've Uber, even from Uber drivers to car drivers. For food, all of those people who currently ranch, or grow corn for livestock and everything, all of that's disrupted. And of course, for labor, that's everybody. Interestingly enough, of course, with the autonomous, with the generative AI that's been happening recently for both visual and language stuff, suddenly people who are in the intelligence or creative space of work are like, uh-oh, it could be coming for us too. So it's, we're looking at every possible corner of society pretty much is potentially going to be disrupted by all of this. So
Absolutely.
how do we navigate this without creating societal, riots, destruction, and actually losing the very thing, the utopia that we could get to it's in grasp and everyone's just like, and freaking out, and we lose it and fall back into a kind of a dark age or something. How do we avoid that trap?
Well, there is no single solution that is going to work everywhere. But there are some guiding principles that we need to operate with in order to minimize the harms and maximize our benefits along the way and our chances of reaching a new system, a new system, a new way of organizing production and society that realizes all of these amazing benefits, all of that potential, without collapsing in the face of the turmoil and the harms that we could run into along the way. So there's some guiding principles. The first, of course, is that we need to be prepared. If we get blindsided by this, if we don't see this coming in advance, if we dismiss it all as science fiction that's 1,000 years away, and we get smashed by this, like a asteroid, impact,
Right.
that is going to feel much more like a catastrophe and much less like an opportunity. And so we have to be prepared. Seeing this coming, knowing it's coming is the first step for sure. Another key guiding principle here is to understand that this is a new system. We are going to be entering a new era where the old rules don't apply anymore.
Right.
And we have to get used to that. The idea that we're going to somehow patch up the old system with band-aid solutions and we're like plugging holes in a sinking ship or something, pick your metaphor, that is not the future that we're headed into. We are facing a future where so many of the fundamental conditions are going to transform that the old system won't make any sense. The old system is built on scarcity. The old system is built on people having to toil most of their waking hours in order to get by, in order to justify their own existence, in order to establish their own identity and value to other people in their community. All of that is going to change. Those old rules don't apply. The old social contract doesn't apply. And we are going to have to rethink those things. Now, there may not be a single optimal solution that everyone everywhere should conform to. It may be that there are many different solutions. It could be a very large solution space that the whole of humanity has to begin exploring. And it could be that there are many ways to successfully thrive socially and individually in the new future that's coming. But we need to discover those. We need to start experimenting now. We need to learn from the
Right.
successes and failures sooner rather than later. And so experimentation is another principle that has to guide us here. We can't be afraid to fail. We can't cling to the old system, and we can't deny that this system transformation is coming.
Right.
Disruption is coming, and it's coming multiplied by 4.
Right.
So
Okay.
those are just a handful of guiding principles. I talk about quite a few more in my book, but those are major guiding principles that we have to operate with. And then there's one more thing that it's very easy to forget because we get stuck in our mindset of scarcity and our mindset of trade-offs, and we get anchored to our past here and the old way of doing things. So I want to stress a key point here, and that is that with all of these new technologies, and especially with robotics and automation, it's easy to think that if a person loses their job, that value, that productivity is gone. And that if enough people lose their jobs or there isn't enough work for people to do, then society will cease to prosper. We will lose prosperity. Right. And that is mistaken. So let's leap forward and imagine a future, a positive future, a generation from now. Most of humanity has retired in the same way that if you're over the age of 65 or 67, maybe you've retired. Right. That's most of humanity. And it doesn't mean that the factories all shut down and the grocery stores all shut down and the restaurants all shut down and the shopping malls all shut down and the airports aren't open. And it doesn't mean any of that. All of the goods and services still get made. They still get produced. They still get distributed. And not just all of the same ones, but more and better ones, more consistently, more abundantly. They just get produced by machines instead of people. And so, again, this is easy to forget. It's like an accountant's error that that there can only be a trade-off, and that if human beings don't have jobs, then we're all destitute. We're all headed for impoverishment. That's not the case. The kind of picture that we're talking about here is one in which productivity and prosperity rise. Right. And the way to think about it isn't humanity losing out. It's humanity transitioning to a new kind of system, one in which there are many more opportunities to do other things besides toil. And I'm avoiding the term work here. You probably notice I'm using toil, not work, right? Work can be great. Work can be fulfilling. Work is something you might want to do voluntarily. If you've got a hobby or whatever it is, it can be fantastic to work. But toil is different. Toil is involuntary labor that you wish you could avoid, that you only do if you must. And that is what we can and what we ought to be eliminating from the human condition.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I tend to, when I talk to my students, and they inevitably, especially the undergrads, are like, what should I do? What should I do? And I'm always like, what is your passion? What is the thing you would do for free? But like, you don't have to be paid to do. And if they can identify that, I'm like, that's what you need to go into that area, because you would just do it even if you didn't get paid for it. And I don't know if you agree with universal basic income or whatever as a possibility eventually, but it again sounds like one of those situations where I know all of us think we work really hard, but in terms of like objectively, most of us in these developed countries work objectively, physically at the very least, less hard. And certainly we don't toil as much as we used to. We have vacuum cleaners, we have washing machines, we have computers to do things for us, so you don't have to sit in a room and like sit there and type on an adding machine and crank numbers out all day. Even intelligence workers, old computers who would do that all day long. I mean, how utterly mind-numbing is that? So we have been liberated from that, but I don't think any of us feel like, oh gosh, we've got nothing to do in our lives. There's plenty to do. It seems like we always fill it with something. We can have conversations like this instead, which is really fun. So yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Right, absolutely.
So we've covered a ton of stuff. Just very briefly, I wanted to mention the fact that you talked about large solution space. And of course, being an AI researcher, I was like, ooh, that's what AI is really good at. Machine learning is great at searching large solution spaces to find like not necessarily the absolute ultimate solution, but really, really good solutions. And so maybe we can leverage AI to actually help us figure out ways out of this situation too. Anyway, I don't know if you have any concluding thoughts about all of this. We've really covered just about everything. It's the whole world at this point, but unless you want to talk about black holes and astronomy, just add to the.
No, I'm happy to talk about any topic at all. The overarching message that I want to convey, and anytime I talk to anyone, is that yes, there's profound change coming, and change is of course it's intimidating. It can be frightening. It's not wrong to be fearful, to be apprehensive about change, and there is monumental change barreling towards us like a tidal wave. This is unequivocal now. And so in the midst of that, it's very, very easy to spiral down into despair and pessimism. And on top of just facing change, we also are inundated with messaging from an inherently negatively biased media of all kinds, social media, mainstream news media, so forth. But there's a negativity bias. We pay attention naturally to negative things. That can get us down. And then on top of that, there is the fact that the environment is taking an absolute clobbering by humanity, right? So the upward trajectory for humanity has been marvelous over the last several centuries. We have entered an era of prosperity and wonder that our ancestors could scarcely have imagined. That's been great for humanity. Not everyone, not everywhere. We still have a huge amount of work to do, and untold millions still suffer terribly and unconscionably. But things are amazingly prosperous in many parts of the world, more than ever before, for more people, more of the time than ever before in human history. Things were really worse in the past for people than they are today. Not for everyone, but for more people. However, that's not true for the environment. The environment has gotten clobbered, and climate change is the big picture, the big story, the big elephant in the room of all of that. And that only adds to the cloud of apprehension and fear, especially that young people are shrouded in when they look to their future. And so the overarching message that I'm trying to convey here is that accepting all of that, recognizing all of that, and not dismissing it, there are nevertheless data-driven, evidence-based reasons to be hugely optimistic about our future. And primarily, it's because new technologies offer the potential for prosperity to explode globally, and at the same time, allow us to solve some of our most pressing environmental problems. I think that's a future worth getting hugely excited about. So, and I mean, we've been talking for a while, but I could talk forever about all of this stuff.
Right.
So.
Hey, well, we'll just take this as a little segue or a teaser for another conversation that we'll have in the future, because I had a great time chatting, and thank you so much for being with us today. We probably talked for about an hour or so. It's really, I don't know. I have a tendency sometimes to get a little bit depressed too, just because it's like there's a lot of apprehension. But I just love not only you, but RethinkX as a company overall, and that real focus on we can fix these problems. It's not just pie in the sky wishful thinking. It's like, here's the data, here's how to do it. And it's very clearly laid out. And I really appreciate that. And thank you so much for having a chat with me today. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure to be here. And you will have to come onto the little program that I do as well one of these days, if you don't mind. I'd love to have you on as a guest. This is a larger global conversation and an important one. Right. And let's keep it going. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Cool. And of course, I will put a link to your YouTube channel and also to your book and everything in the description as well, so people can check it out. In the meantime, I guess I will be seeing everybody on your podcast or your YouTube channel. And everybody have a great day. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye.